The morning Marcus Chun discovered the damage. He was running late. He'd spent the night working on client proposals for his marketing firm, finally collapsing into bed around 3 a.m. The alarm on his phone had buzzed at 6:30 and he dragged himself through the motion shower coffee. The blur of routine that came with being a 42-year-old single man whose work had consumed most of his 30s and all of his 40s. The Tesla was his one indulgence, purchased 3 years ago after landing a major account that changed his company's trajectory. It was black, sleek, and he'd named it after his late mother, which he'd never admit to anyone because it sounded pathetic now. Stepping out of his condo's front door with his phone already in hand and his mind running through the day's schedule, Marcus almost missed it entirely. He was headed toward the driveway when something caught the corner of his eye, a glint of light. Wrong somehow, reflecting at an angle his car's finish shouldn't create. He stopped. The morning sun was still low, casting long shadows across the street, painting everything in that golden hour glow that made even ordinary neighborhoods look like movie sets. Marcus approached the driver's side door slowly, as if approaching something dangerous. The scratches were unmistakable. 3 parallel lines, deep enough that he could feel them with his finger end. He did, running his index finger along the first gouge, then the second, then the third. They ran from the front quarter panel down toward the rear door, jagged and aggressive, like something had been dragged across the paint with considerable force. The clear coat was completely stripped away in places. The metal underneath caught the morning light with a dull, wounded gleam. No, Marcus heard himself say. Then louder, no, 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 no. He walked the full length of the car, checking for other damage there on the other side. Smaller scratches, almost like they'd been made by something being dragged along the vehicle. His stomach twisted. He'd had this car detailed 3 weeks ago. He knew every inch of its finish. This was new. This was fresh. Marcus stood in the middle of his driveway, hands on his hips, breathing in that careful way people do when they're trying not to lose their minds. The morning was beautiful. Birds were singing. His neighbors' houses looked peaceful, their lawns meticulously maintained, their trash cans already hidden behind their gates. This was Millbrook Lane, one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the suburbs, the kind of place where people moved because they wanted their kids to be safe, their property values to climb, their lives to look exactly like the ones in catalog photographs. And someone had scratched his car. Marcus pulled out his phone and took photos, 23 of them, from every angle, in the sunlight and then in shadow. Close-ups of the gouges, shots showing the entire side of the vehicle. He was documenting crime scene evidence and he didn't even know it yet. It wasn't until his third pass around the car that he noticed the tricycle daughter was lying on its side in his driveway, about 15 feet away from where his Tesla was parked. It was small, bright red with yellow trim, and it had definitely not been there the night before. Marcus would have seen it when he'd pulled in around midnight. He walked over to it, not touching it yet, just observing. The front wheel was scratched. There were marks on the frame. It was a kid's tricycle, the kind that costs maybe $30 at a big box store. The pieces assembled themselves in his mind before he was fully conscious of them connecting. He was looking at his neighbor's property. Damage, probably evidence of what had happened to his car. Marcus lived alone. He'd bought his condo in Millbrook Lane 5 years ago, back when the neighborhood was still building out. He'd chosen it specifically because it was quiet and somewhat removed, with properties set back from the street, surrounded by mature trees and hedges that provided privacy. He wasn't particularly friendly with his neighbors nodding hellos, the occasional wave. That was the extent of their interactions. Suburban friendliness had always felt performative to him, all surface tension and careful distance, but he knew there were kids 2 houses down. The Morrison family, they had 3 kids. He'd seen them around, heard them playing, the usual sounds of suburban life, and he knew the name of the woman who ran that house, Karen Morrison. Everyone on the street knew her, actually. She was one of those neighbors who made their presence felt. Karen Morrison was the type who complained about everything. She'd sent 3 separate letters to the HOA about his trash cans being visible for 2 extra hours on collection day. She'd left notes on various neighbors' cars about parking. She'd organized a neighborhood watch meeting that turned into a 45-minute session of her explaining parking violations, fence heights, and the declining standards of Millbrook Lane. She had that particular quality of person that made you immediately regret opening your front door, the kind of energy that demanded you take sides, get involved, validate her grievances. Marcus had always managed to avoid substantial interaction with her. She made his skin crawl in a way he couldn't quite articulate. There was something performing about her friendliness, something underneath it that felt hostile. But he'd never had a real conflict with her, never given her a reason to bear him any particular grudge. Until this moment. Standing in his driveway with his scratched car and her abandoned tricycle, he might not have connected to this particular neighbor at all. He went back inside his condo and called the police line. He reported the vandalism, gave them photos over his cell phone, and an officer promised to come by within the next few hours to take a report. Then he called his insurance company. The representative was sympathetic but not particularly helpful. Damage to a vehicle would require a claim, which would require proof of liability. which would be difficult to establish without witness testimony or surveillance footage. Did he have a security camera? He didn't. That's unfortunately common in residential areas, the representative said, with the tone of someone reading from a script. Without proof of who caused the damage, this might fall under your comprehensive coverage. I'd recommend getting an estimate from a body shop and going from there. Marcus hung up. He'd need to find a shop, get an estimate, figure out the deductible was going to cost him money, time, and aggravation. And for what? Someone's kid had ridden a tricycle across his driveway and left it as the only evidence of the crime. He was standing in his kitchen, staring at nothing in particular, when he heard the sound of someone knocking on his front door. Through the frosted glass, he could see a silhouette woman, her hair piled on top of her head, her shape suggesting the kind of animated energy that came from someone used to occupying space and demanding attention. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stood there for a moment, already knowing something was wrong about this timing. He'd been on the phone with the police less than 10 minutes ago. The knock came again. Harder dot. He opened the door. Karen Morrison stood on his porch in yoga pants and a tank top, her face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was holding something in her hand, a pink glittery headband that he recognized as belonging to a child. "Hi, Marcus," she said, with that particular brightness of someone about to weaponize friendliness. "I'm so sorry to bother you this early, but I was wondering if you'd seen this. My youngest lost it yesterday, and I think it might have blown into your driveway during the wind last night." "The wind? Hadn't been any wind." "What I actually wanted to talk to you about," Marcus said, not inviting her inside, "is the damage to my car and this." He pointed to the tricycle, still lying on its side in his driveway. Karen's expression didn't change. Her smile held steady, but something shifted in her eyes. "A calculation. A recalibration." "Oh my God," she said. "Is your car damaged?" "Yes. There are scratches running down the entire side. Deep scratches. And this tricycle was in my driveway. This morning it appears to have matching damage." Karen looked at the tricycle as if seeing it for the first time. "I have no idea how that got there. Kids play, they ride their bikes, maybe it slipped away from them." 3 parallel scratches don't happen by accident," Marcus said. "Well, I'm sure my kids didn't do it on purpose, if that's what you're implying. Kids are not always careful. If your kids hit my car, you need to contact your homeowner's insurance and let them know. This is a matter for our insurance companies." Karen's face tightened. The smile faded. "Marcus, I think you're jumping to conclusions here. A tricycle in your driveway could have come from anywhere. It's windy sometimes. Kids play, there's no wind today, and I have photos of the damage taken this morning. I've already reported it to the police and filed an insurance claim. If your children are responsible, we'll let the insurance companies sort it out. That's the proper way to handle this." "I'm not admitting my children did anything," Karen said, her voice dropping into a register that was somehow colder than her brightness had been. "And I think it's pretty unfriendly of you to come at me like this before even having a conversation." "I'm having a conversation with you now," Marcus said. "You're accusing me of something you have no proof of. I have a damaged car in your tricycle. That's proof enough to involve insurance." Karen turned slightly, glancing at the tricycle with an expression of something like contempt. That tricycle could belong to any child in T. Fall out of that choice. 3 days later, Marcus had an estimate from a body shop, $4,800 to repair the damage to his Tesla. The repairs would take 2 weeks. He'd need a rental car. The comprehensive coverage on his insurance would eat the deductible. But, without proof of liability, the rest would come out of his pocket. He was already planning to call Karen again, to try one more time to escalate this through insurance claims. When he discovered the next problem, he was leaving work alone. The day that had drained him of patience and goodwill when his phone rang. It was dispatched from the local police department. The officer who'd taken his report was calling to follow up. "We finished our investigation on the vehicle damage." The officer, a woman named Patterson, said, "I spoke with your neighbor, Karen Morrison. She denies any involvement and says the tricycle belongs to a community toy that's shared among neighborhood children." "That's not true," Marcus said, pulling into traffic. "It's her tricycle. It has her kids' marks on it. She did provide a statement saying there's often wind in the neighborhood that picks up loose items and that she has no way of verifying who was riding tricycles through her driveway the previous evening. Without video footage or eyewitness testimony, there's not much we can do. It's a civil matter at this point. I'd recommend letting your insurance handle it." Marcus felt his grip tighten on the steering wheel. "So she just gets to deny responsibility and that's it? No less you to have evidence placing a children on the tricycle during the time of the damage." "Yes, the damage itself doesn't prove liability. And unless there's significant vandalism or property destruction, these cases are very difficult to pursue without video evidence. The neighborhood watch has cameras covering common areas, but your driveway isn't one of them." That night, Marcus did something he'd been avoiding. He drove to a home security store and bought a Ring doorbell camera, a motion sensor camera for his driveway, and the equipment to monitor them from his phone. The total came to over $800. He installed them himself. Working late into the evening, his hands steady but his jaw tight with frustration. If Karen's kids were going to keep sneaking into his driveway, he was going to catch them. He kept expecting them not to. Part of him believed that now that he'd confronted Karen directly, now that the police were involved, they'd stop. Kids respected boundaries once they knew someone was watching. That was the theory. Anyway, but 4 days after the first damage, Marcus got an alert on his phone. Motion detected in driveway. 9:47 p.m. He pulled up the camera feed and watched in real time as two children, a girl who looked about 7 and a boy who looked about 10, came riding down the street on bicycles, deliberately turned into his driveway, and began riding in circles around his Tesla. The girl was pedaling hard, her hair flying, her face set in the expression of pure joy that children wore when they thought no one was watching. The boy was doing something else. He was standing on the pedals, bunny hopping the bike, landing hard and creating a jolt that traveled through the frame. Marcus watched, unable to move, as the boy deliberately steered his bike close to the car's side and then dropped the front wheel, creating a scraping sound that, even through the camera's modest audio, he could hear with perfect clarity. They weren't trying to hide. There was no sneaking, no furtive movement. They were just riding their bikes through his driveway, playing, treating his property like it belonged to them. The girl looked directly at the camera and waved. Then they both pedaled out of frame, heading back toward the street. Marcus sat in his living room, his phone in his hand, the video still frozen on that image of the girl waving at his camera. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he did something he rarely did. He called his brother. "She's got them doing it on purpose," Marcus said when Derek answered. Derek lived 3 hours away, was a divorce attorney, and had always been the one in the family with the emotional intelligence to untangle complicated situations. "They're deliberately scratching my car. And Karen, she's probably putting them up to it." They waved at the camera like they owned the place. "Okay," Derek said, his voice settling into the measured tone he used when dealing with upset clients. "Have you contacted the police again?" The first cop said it was civil, then call them back, show them the video. "That's trespassing. That's property damage. That's documented." Marcus called the police again. He asked to speak with Officer Patterson, but she was off shift. A different officer took the report, listened to Marcus describe the video, and told him to file a trespassing complaint in addition to the property damage complaint. He could press charges, but given that they were minors and given that the damage appeared to be ongoing rather than deliberate destruction, the prosecutor might not be interested. However, the officer said, "I can talk to her about the trespassing. That might be enough to scare her into controlling her kids." Officer Patterson showed up at Marcus's door the next afternoon. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray streaking through her dark hair and the kind of exhaustion that came from 25 years in law enforcement. She watched the video on his phone, her expression not changing. "Yep," she said, "that's trespassing, and that's deliberate property damage." The girl waving at the camera. "That's the thing that changes this from kids being kids to, we know what we're doing, I'll talk to her." Marcus wasn't in his condo when the conversation happened, but he heard about it through the Millbrook Lane neighborhood messaging app about an hour later. "Karen's going to be furious." His neighbors were texting. "The police were at her house." "What did you tell them, Marcus?" "You're being kind of harsh about kids making mistakes. This is way overblown. Some of us actually know Karen and her family and they're good people." He didn't respond. Instead, he sat and thought about the peculiar social calculus of suburban neighborhoods. Karen Morrison was friendly with his neighbors. She'd probably been in most of their houses. She'd probably given recommendations for contractors, attended holiday parties, built the kind of social capital that came from being visible and engaged. And Marcus had just sixed the police on her kids, so in the eyes of the neighborhood, he was the villain. His phone rang at 6 p.m. It was Karen, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "What the hell, Marcus? Did you really need to get the police involved with my children? They're kids. They were just riding their bikes. They were deliberately damaging my property," Marcus said calmly, "and trespassing on my driveway multiple times after you told me your children weren't responsible. They ride their bikes all over the neighborhood. They probably cut through your driveway because it's on the way home. You don't need to criminalize childhood. I need you to keep them off my property. If that means I have to involve the police, then that's what I'll do." "You're a cold person, Marcus. You know that. You're a really, really cold person. Most neighbors would have just let it go. Most people would understand that accidents happen. Accidents happen once. This has happened multiple times and they're not accidents. You're going to regret this," Karen said. And then she hung up. Marcus stood in his living room, the phone still in his hand, and felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in the tone of her last sentence that went beyond neighborly anger. It sounded like a promise. That night he checked his cameras obsessively. Nothing. The driveway was empty. The street was quiet. The neighborhood settled into the kind of darkness that suburbs cultivated, where everyone was behind closed doors, watching television or scrolling through phones, existing in their own isolated pockets of life. But something had shifted. The air felt different on Millbrook Lane now. The carefully maintained calm had cracked, and Marcos wasn't sure anymore that he'd done the right thing. His insurance company, when he called to update them on the police report, told him that the evidence of deliberate damage would help establish liability. Karen's insurance company would be contacted. They would likely categorize this as a homeowner's liability claim. It might take months to resolve, but the damage would be covered. Did you mention to the police that you believe the parent is responsible for supervising the children? His claims adjuster asked. I implied it. That helps. We can argue that the parent is liable for the children's actions under negligent supervision. Laws in your state push for that angle if you talk to them again. So Marcus had, in addition to making an enemy of his neighbor, also made it clear that he intended to pursue this through insurance, which meant Karen's insurance rates would go up, which meant she would have to explain to her insurance company why she was liable for her children deliberately damaging a neighbor's property, which meant he'd just guaranteed that Karen Morrison would hate him. He got a call from the HOA president. The next day, the HOA president's name was Richard, and he sounded uncomfortable.